Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Mark Marex, Director of Index Research and Development at Nasdaq Investment Intelligence, to discuss performance in the Nasdaq indexes that are designed to track exposure to AI. It is great to see you, Mark. Welcome to Trade Talks, and thanks for joining us as always. Let's take a look at Nasdaq 100 performance in the context of those indexes.
Thanks, Joe. Great to be here as always. And yeah, there have been so many interesting headlines this year around the Nasdaq 100 outperformance. You know, what's been driving it? AI is certainly a big part of it. I don't know how I would rank it necessarily relative to everything else that's been going on a macro level. You know, inflation coming down, interest rates maybe finally peaking. You know, we had that flight to safety trade back in March with the banking crisis, and of course, fundamentals have held up really well in the index versus kind of consensus estimates going into this year. So a lot of factors driving that outperformance. You can see here, as of yesterday's close, Nasdaq 100 in green there, up almost 39% year to date. That is more than double what the broader market with the S&P 500 there in the yellow has done, about 15% up year to date. But then, yes, as you alluded to, what I'm showing here are three thematic indexes that we calculate here at Nasdaq to track AI exposure directly. So sort of in the light blue, NQ Intel, that's probably the purest AI index in terms of the exposure sought there. That's the Nasdaq CTA AI index. In the purple, you've got the Nasdaq Global AI and Big Data Index. That one's actually up even slightly better at 44% up year to date. Versus 43% for NQ Intel. And then NQ Robo is another index that NASDAQ partnered with CTA to track AI and robotics companies combined. That one's a little bit lighter in the year-to-date performance, up about 31%. But you could basically see, right, in terms of the trajectory of a lot of these AI indexes versus the NASDAQ 100, they've been trading pretty closely for most of the year. So it's easy to make that assumption that, you know, correlation is causation. And in this case, at least, the heavy exposure of the Nasdaq 100 on a company basis, on an index weight basis to the AI theme is really powering that performance forward this year.
And Mark, how much AI exposure is inside the NDX?
So we've been getting this question a lot, no surprise, throughout most of the year from a lot of our clients. And we have two ways that we think are pretty easy to understand and pretty indicative of how much exposure there actually is. There's ongoing work to try to quantify more of that. But let's start by the easiest one to get, which is, you know, as I said on the previous slide, we have these AI-specific thematic indexes built out, where the methodology is written to try to give you exposure to companies that are doing something meaningful within the space. And so if you look at that robotics index, there's 19 companies overlapping with the Nasdaq 100, 40% of the index there. If you look at that AI and big data index, though, that's the single biggest overlapping exposure within our entire thematic index suite for the Nasdaq 100. 26 companies in the Nasdaq 100. Most of the big ones, so you're talking over 60% of the index weight, are also found in that AI or the AI and big data index. So really, really clear to see, at least from looking at thematic index overlap, how strong of an exposure you get with this theme just by tracking the Nasdaq 100.
And Mark, let's wrap up and talk about R&D for a moment here, because you and I have covered this a number of times over the years, just how much the companies in the Nasdaq 100 invest into their R&D, and clearly we're seeing it pay off in technologies like AI. So what are you seeing there right now?
Yeah, so this is one of kind of many ways that we track R&D investment throughout the Nasdaq 100 index. We track it on a, you know, sort of basic what companies report on their financials every quarter that they are spending in R&D in absolute terms as a percent of their revenue. We also track the valuation of the entirety of their patent portfolios month to month with a special data set that we have access to. But then what I'm showing you here, this is an interesting way of tracking it, which is taking the patent universe that's out there that we update on a one-year rolling basis continuously, and segment out into 35 key areas of disruptive tech the number of patent filings relating to each of these areas. And you can have a patent that obviously covers more than one area at a time, but this tells you in a nutshell, okay, of the global publicly traded companies that are out there, around 20,000 that we track, what percentage of patents relating to natural language processing, which is one of the core sort of disruptive technologies that AI is built on, right? What is the percent of patents globally filed that were filed by Nasdaq 100 companies for NLP? Last 12-month period we looked at 42%. You look at stuff like deep learning, speech recognition, big data, image recognition. A lot of these are 20, 30, 40% of all patents filed globally by just the 100 companies that are in the Nasdaq 100. And then you've got the sort of related technologies like cloud computing, 3D graphics, speech recognition, chatbots, these other related technologies that are all part of bringing AI sort of to the masses. They all score very, very highly. And you can see that of this entire list of 35, the ones I've boxed out, the ones relating to AI, most of those are sort of among the most active filing areas for Nasdaq 100 companies. So clearly it's a focus in terms of, whether you look at the patent filings, whether you look at the, announcements like with NVIDIA, where in their most recent earnings call, they had maybe the most impressive update to forward guidance in the history of any company, in the history of the stock market, when they raised their quarterly guidance for 2Q by 50% up on the back of this massive, now currently happening demand for their AI specialized chips. That is all driving individual names higher. That's driving the index higher because a lot of that exposure is very highly concentrated in the index, and we'll be sure to continue following that as it evolves over this year and beyond.
All right, Mark, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.